So if you're in real estate, I'm sure you've bumped into this expensive question. You buy a property, you tear down the old building to make way for something new, but what about the value of that old structure? Can you claim a tax loss for it? I mean, it seems like you should be able to, right? But the answer, well, it's surprisingly complex. Let's really dig into the rules of the demolition loss.
All right, here's the game plan. First, we're going to define the deduction problem that everyone runs into. Then, we'll get right into the weeds of the law with Section 280B, and we'll figure out what the IRS actually considers a demolition. After that, we'll look at a few kind of rare exceptions, and then we get to the main event, a really powerful strategy using something called general asset accounts that can totally change the game. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a clear action plan.
You know, this scenario pops up constantly. You find a perfect piece of land, but it's got an old, rundown building on it. So you do the logical thing. You knock it down to build something new. But what happens to the value, that remaining basis of the old building that's still on your books? Well, that's where the tax code throws a massive curveball that can cost you some serious money.
So this is it, the million-dollar question. I mean, common sense says if you destroy an asset, you should be able to write it off as a loss. Simple enough, right? Well, when it comes to buildings, the tax code has a very clear, and for a lot of people, a very frustrating answer.
The short answer to that big question is almost always a hard no. And the reason why comes down to a single, really powerful piece of the tax code, Section 280B. This is the rule that governs pretty much everything we're talking about today.
And you don't have to take my word for it. The language of the law itself is crystal clear. It says, and I'm quoting here, "No deduction shall be allowed for any amount expended for such demolition or any loss sustained." It really doesn't get more unambiguous than that. The money you pay the demolition crew and the entire remaining value of the building on your books, the IRS says, nope, you cannot deduct them.
So, if you can't deduct it, where does all that value go? Well, it gets absorbed into the cost basis of the land itself. And here's the kicker, you can't depreciate land. So that value just sits there, locked up, doing absolutely nothing for you from a tax perspective until the day you eventually sell the entire property. It's a real black hole for your capital.
Now, the law is very, very particular about that word structure. It specifically means the building and its core components. So why does this matter so much? Because anything that isn't considered part of the structure, think about things like specialized HVAC systems, certain equipment, even old carpeting, isn't subject to this rule. That value can often be written off, which is exactly why identifying these non-structural assets is so crucial.
This brings us to the next big question. What actually counts as a demolition? I mean, if you're doing a massive gut renovation, it can sure feel like you're tearing the whole place down. The IRS gets this, so to draw a clear line in the sand, they created a very specific test to determine where renovation stops and demolition begins.
And believe me, this distinction is everything. If your project is considered a renovation, you can often deduct the value of the old components you rip out. That's called a partial disposition loss. But if you cross that line and it becomes a demolition in the eyes of the IRS, Section 280B slams the door shut on any deduction for that structure.
So here's the nitty-gritty of that test, straight from Revenue Procedure 9527. To stay in what's called the safe harbor and avoid being classified as a demolition, you have to pass a two-part test. First, you have to keep at least 75% of the existing external walls in place. And second, you also have to keep at least 75% of the internal structural framework.
And it is absolutely critical to understand this is an and test, not an or test. You have to satisfy both conditions. If you keep 100% of the external walls, but you only keep, say, 70% of the internal framework, guess what? You failed the test. The whole project is now a demolition for tax purposes, and the entire remaining basis of that structure gets capitalized to the land, period.
So Section 280B seems pretty airtight, right? And for the most part, it is. But it's not quite the end of the story. There are a few very specific, pretty rare exceptions where you might be able to claim a loss even when a demolition is involved.
To really get why the rule is what it is today, you have to look back at how things used to be. Before 1984, the rule, under Regulation 1.165-3, was all about your intent. If you bought a property and then later decided to tear it down, you could often deduct that loss. Section 280B came along and completely wiped that off the map. Now, your intent is totally irrelevant. All that matters is the act of demolition itself.
Okay, here is a key exception you need to know about: casualty losses.
If a building is damaged or destroyed by a casualty event, we're talking about a fire, a hurricane, a flood, you can claim a casualty loss under Section 165. That loss reduces the building's basis. But, and this is so crucial, if you then pay to demolish what's left of the building, those specific demolition costs are still non-deductible under 280B and have to be added to the land's basis.
Then there's this other little wrinkle from case law, specifically a case called Deduct versus Commissioner. This case brought up the idea of an abnormal retirement. So, imagine a building suddenly becomes useless for a reason other than your plan to demolish it, like say you discover a hidden structural defect that makes it completely uninsurable. You may be able to claim a loss for that retirement. The key difference is that the loss is because of the defect, not on account of the demolition that comes later.
Okay, so we've been through the tough rules, the definitions, the rare exceptions. Now let's talk about the big one. This is the most powerful tool we have for dealing with Section 280B. And this isn't some obscure exception. It's a proactive planning strategy that, if you set it up correctly, lets you pretty much sidestep the whole problem.
So what is this thing? It's called a General Asset Account, or GAA for short. This is an election you can make to treat a group of assets, or in this case just a single building, as one single item for all your depreciation purposes. It simplifies your books, but its real power, its secret weapon, is in how it treats dispositions.
All right, so how does this magic work? It's basically a three-step process. First, and this is absolutely non-negotiable, you must elect to put the building into a GAA in the very first year you place it in service, and it has to be on that year's original timely filed tax return. Step 2, later when you demolish the building, the special rules for GAAs say that the basis of that disposed asset is treated as zero. But, and here's the key, the original basis stays in the account. Which leads to Step 3. You just keep on depreciating the entire GAA as if nothing ever happened, recovering the building's full cost over its normal life. It's pretty amazing.
So, does this really move the needle? You bet it does. A case study on a shopping plaza found that making a simple GA election for a building they later tore down saved them $72,000 in today's dollars. I mean, that is a huge return for what really just amounts to checking a box on a tax return years in advance.
Now, before you rush out and do this, there are some really critical cautions that come with this strategy. First off, you can't buy a building and tear it down in the same tax year. Also, keep in mind, once a building is in a GAA, you give up the ability to claim those smaller losses for partial renovations. And finally, you have to be careful of the anti-abuse rules. If it looks like you bought the property with the sole immediate intent to demolish it, the IRS could try to challenge the strategy.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground here. The rule, the definitions, the exceptions, and that big GAA workaround. So let's boil all of this down into a few key takeaways you can actually use going forward.
Look, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that you have to be proactive. First, make that GAA election in year one. It is your single best defense against Section 280B. Second, always consider a cost segregation study when you buy a property. That's what will identify all those non-structural assets you can write off separately. And third, if you're renovating, document everything to prove you stayed inside that 75% safe harbor so you can claim those valuable partial disposition losses.
So, we'll leave you with this thought. The demolition rules really show how a single line in the tax code can have a massive impact on a project's bottom line. The real question is your tax strategy built to withstand the test of time, or is it just waiting to get demolished by a rule you didn't plan for? Thanks for joining us.